A poor waitress helped a lost tourist find his hotel, not knowing he was a billionaire who would fall in love with her. The rain fell in steady sheets over Manhattan, slicking the pavement and turning the glow of streetlights into smeared halos across the wet ground. It was close to midnight, and most of the city had already tucked itself behind closed doors and glowing windows. On 42nd Street, the rain was louder than footsteps, louder than breathing. Lena adjusted the straps of her worn-out backpack and pulled the thin hood of her coat tighter around her face. Her shoes were soaked through. Every step squished, cold and familiar. She had just finished a double shift at the diner, 10 hours on her feet, 5 of them without a break, and now she was heading home to the tiny apartment she shared with her 12-year-old sister, Nina, who was running a fever and waiting, with a damp washcloth on her head and no dinner. The streets were nearly empty, except for the occasional cab splashing past, and one sleeping figure curled in a shop doorway. Then she heard it. "Miss, please, I'm sorry. I think I'm lost." She stopped, heart jerking slightly at the voice. It wasn't angry or aggressive. It was frightened, out of place. She turned and saw a man standing awkwardly beneath the dim awning of a closed bookstore. He was drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, his coat dripping water onto his shoes. In his hands was a piece of soggy paper. "I lost my phone," he said, his accent heavy. "French, maybe? I was walking from the station. I thought it was nearby." Lena stepped a little closer, her eyes scanning the paper. It was a printed map, partially torn, with the name of a hotel circled in blue ink. The street name was smudged, but she recognized it. "That's about 7 blocks from here," she said, tilting her head. "You've been going the wrong way." The man closed his eyes briefly. "I knew it. I turned left instead of right. I've been walking in circles." She hesitated. The apartment was 20 minutes away, and she needed to get Nina some medicine from the drugstore on the way. But the man looked genuinely lost and freezing. "I can walk you there," she said suddenly. His eyes widened. "You don't have to. It's okay. I know the area." She offered a small smile. "Besides, you look like you might turn into an icicle." He laughed, grateful. "Merci, thank you, truly." They walked side by side under the rain, neither of them speaking for a few seconds. The city around them pulsed gently, occasional honks, the splash of tires, the rustle of wind funneling between the buildings. "My name's Julian," he said after a while. "I'm from Paris, first time in New York." "Lena," she replied. "You picked quite the weather to visit." "I was supposed to arrive this afternoon," he said. "But the flight was delayed. Then my luggage was lost. Then my phone died and now I'm just the cliché tourist." "You're not the worst I've seen," Lena said, and he chuckled again. She learned he was in town for a bit of thinking, as he put it. Not work, not a vacation exactly, just space. Sometimes Paris is too loud, even in silence. She didn't understand entirely, but she nodded anyway. "And you?" he asked. "You work nearby?" "The diner on 38th, she said. "I've been there almost 3 years." He glanced at her with soft curiosity. "And what do you do when you're not saving lost tourists?" Lena smiled faintly. "Mostly just try to keep the lights on and raise my little sister." He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. When they reached the hotel, an old building tucked between a bank and a souvenir shop, Julian stopped in front of the door. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do this." "It's fine," Lena said, brushing her wet bangs from her face. "Just glad you found your way." Julian looked at her for a moment longer, then pulled something from his coat pocket. A handkerchief, surprisingly clean and neatly folded. He offered it to her. "You gave me your time. Let me give you something warm." She took it with hesitation, then nodded once. "Good night, Julia." "Good night, Lena." She turned and disappeared into the rain. Neither of them knew, in that moment, how much their lives had just changed. The apartment smelled faintly of damp socks and detergent when Lena stepped inside, shivering from the rain. The heater hadn't worked properly in weeks. The hallway light flickered once before going dark entirely. She left her wet shoes by the door, her socks squelching against the cracked linoleum floor. "Nina?" she called softly. From the small bedroom came a weak voice. "In here." Lena dropped her bag and walked in. Her sister lay curled up on the narrow mattress, a towel pressed to her forehead. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked smaller than usual, swallowed by the oversized hoodie she wore. "Hey," Lena whispered, brushing damp hair from the girl's face. "Still hot?" Nina nodded, eyes glassy. Lena leaned down and kissed her forehead, then made her way to the tiny kitchen. She opened the fridge. Nothing but a bottle of soy sauce, half a lemon, and a single egg that had likely expired last week. The cupboard wasn't much better. A bag of instant noodles, crumpled but still sealed, sat alone on the shelf. She sighed, filled a small pot with water and set it on the stove. As the noodles cooked, she added a pinch of salt, the egg, and a drop of soy sauce, stirring carefully. It wasn't a meal. It was survival. Back in the bedroom, she fed Nina slowly, spoon by spoon, until the girl's eyelids began to droop. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Nina asked. "Of course," Lena whispered, though she knew it was a lie. After tucking her in, Lena sat at the kitchen table, still damp from the rain, and opened her old laptop. The screen flickered twice before turning on. She pulled up the scholarship application she'd started weeks ago, but never had time to finish. She filled in her name, her story, her dreams, edited and re-edited every word until the sun started to rise. She didn't write about being tired, or scared, or hungry. She wrote about wanting to teach, to build something that mattered, to give kids like Nina a better future. The next day began like every other. She skipped breakfast, tied her hair back, slipped on her worn sneakers, and walked to the diner. On the way out, she passed the landlord in the hallway. "You're behind again," he said, arms crossed. 3 days or I change the locks." "I'll get it," Lena replied, her voice tight. "I promise." The diner buzzed with noise, clinking cutlery, sizzling grease. Murmurs and orders shouted across the counter. Lena tied on her apron and smiled through the morning rush. She served coffee to men who didn't look up, wiped syrup from sticky menus, filled ketchup bottles, and cleared dishes too heavy for her aching wrists. By noon, her legs throbbed. By 2, her lower back had gone numb. At 5, she gulped down a glass of water, sat for 3 minutes behind the staff fridge, then jumped back up when her name was yelled. During her break, she leaned against the alley wall behind the building, staring at her phone. No calls, no responses to her application, nothing. Her coworker Carla lit a cigarette beside her. "You looked like you wrestled a storm last night." Lena chuckled without humor. "Something like that." Carla squinted. "I saw you walking a guy last night. Tourist?" Lena nodded. "He got lost, no phone. Didn't know where his hotel was. And you helped him, in the rain?" Lena shrugged. "Girl," Carla said, exhaling smoke, "he looked like he could afford a taxi made of gold." "I didn't help him because he was rich," Lena said. "I helped him because no one else would have." Carla shook her head. "You're gonna burn out." "Maybe," Lena said, looking up at the dull gray sky. "But not today." She returned inside, tied her apron again, and smiled at the next customer, an elderly woman who ordered coffee with too much sugar and asked about the weather like it mattered more than anything else in the world. That night, Lena counted the tips she'd made. $18.43. Enough to buy some medicine, maybe bread. As she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, her steps slow and sore, Lena didn't think about Julian or what might have happened had she not stopped. She only thought of Nina, of bills due, of dreams she still dared to write about in applications that might never get answered. But even in that exhaustion, beneath the ache and the endlessness of it all, there was still something soft and warm inside her. Hope. Fragile, foolish, but still alive. She didn't know that her quiet choice to help a stranger in the rain had already set something greater in motion. She only knew how to keep going, one step at a time. The bell above the door jingled, barely audible over the clatter of dishes and hum of conversations inside the diner. Lena glanced up from behind the counter, ready to greet another customer with the same practiced smile. But the smile faltered when she saw him. Julian. He looked nothing like the man she had found that rainy night. His coat was crisp, tailored to perfection, his shoes dry and polished, his dark scarf wrapped neatly at the collar. He moved with quiet confidence, but when his eyes landed on hers, something gentler emerged, recognition and something more. "Lena," he said, walking toward her, his voice soft but clear, "you found me when I was completely lost." She blinked. "You made it," she replied, almost in disbelief. Julian reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in clear plastic. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. It was the handkerchief, the one she had offered him in the rain, now washed, pressed, folded neatly, and sealed to keep it safe. "I couldn't leave the city without returning this," he added, "and to say thank you properly." Lena hesitated, looking around the diner. Her manager was busy yelling at someone in the kitchen. The line of customers hadn't formed yet. She had 10 minutes, maybe less. Julian caught her hesitation. "If this is a bad time, I understand." She looked back at him. Something in his presence, calm, unhurried, made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "I have a break coming up," she said. 15 minutes. I'd be honored to borrow them." They walked to a nearby park, still damp from the last night's rain, but touched by a rare patch of winter sunlight. Julian bought them both coffee from a street cart, his black, hers sweet and creamy. They sat on a bench, a light breeze rustling the bare trees above. Julian took a sip, then looked at her. "So, how are you?" he asked. She shrugged instinctively. "I'm okay." He tilted his head, studying her. "No, I mean, how are you, really?" The question stunned her, not because it was profound, but because no one ever asked it like that, not with intention, not with genuine interest. She let the silence linger before answering. "Tired," she admitted. "Most of the time. Worried. Sometimes hopeful, sometimes not." Julian nodded, as if those words made perfect sense to him. "What about you?" she asked. "You found your phone, your hotel. What brings you here again?" "I stayed longer than I planned," he said. "Something about this city, or maybe just something about being lost here. It reminded me how to feel small again. It's humbling." She chuckled lightly. "Most people hate feeling small. I used to, but now, I think it's when we're small that we notice the most." They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence. "Do you always help strangers?" he asked. "Only the ones who look like they need it." "Then I'm lucky." She glanced at him, half smiling. "You look like a drowned puppy." "I felt like one." They laughed. Her phone buzzed. "Break over." "I should head back," she said, standing slowly. "Of course." He stood with her. "May I see you again?" She paused. Not out of suspicion, just surprise. It wasn't often anyone asked to see her for who she was, not what she did. "Maybe," she said. "I work a lot." "I'm good at finding people," he said with a smile. She gave him a small nod, then turned back toward the diner. Julian watched her go, holding the empty coffee cup, a breeze lifting the edge of his scarf, and Lena, walking back to the clang of dishes and shouting voices, felt something shift quietly inside her. For the first time in a long time, someone had asked about her, not the worker, not the older sister, not the struggling tenant, just Lena. They met in the early mornings, always before Lena's shift started. The city was quieter then, still rubbing the sleep from its eyes, and there was a kind of peace they both seemed to need. Sometimes they sat at a cafe near Union Square, where the barista remembered their orders by the third visit. Black coffee for Julian, chai latte for Lena. Other times, they walked the High Line, watching the sky shift from gray to gold, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly beneath the trees. One morning, Julian brought 2 croissants wrapped in brown paper. They sat on a bench outside the public library, sharing the buttery pastries in silence, surrounded by the rhythm of taxis and bicycles and opening storefronts. Lena smiled. "This feels stolen." "Stolen?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Like we stole a little piece of calm before the world wakes up." Julian nodded. "Then I hope no one calls the police." She laughed, and for a moment she looked lighter, less weighed down by the world. Over the days that followed, they talked, not in long monologues or dramatic confessions, but in pieces, fragments, One sentence at a time. "My parents died when I was 16, Lena told him one day, her voice flat but not bitter. "Car crash. I had to grow up fast. Nina was just 6. "I'm sorry," Julian said gently. "I wanted to be a teacher," she continued. "Still do. But life had other ideas." He didn't offer pity, only silence, respectful and listening. And he shared his own truths, slowly, like someone testing the water after years of drowning. "I used to be someone important," he said one morning as they sat near a row of blooming tulips in Bryant Park. "To the world, at least. My name was in articles. People quoted things I said in meetings." Lena glanced at him. But I haven't felt like anyone in a long time. After my mother passed, the lights stayed on, but nothing inside me did." He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "Everyone saw my name," he said quietly, "but no one saw me." Lena said nothing for a moment, just reached over and touched his wrist lightly. No words, just presence. They had both known absence, both learned to survive in spaces where no one looked too closely, and now, in those simple moments, reading side by side at the library, standing beneath city trees, they were being seen again, not in the way the world sees, but the way someone sees when they actually care. One morning as a light snow fell, Julian pulled a scarf tighter around Lena's neck before she could protest. "New York wind has no manners," he said. She rolled her eyes, but she didn't move away. Another day, she brought him a thermos of tea with honey. "Your throat sounded hoarse yesterday. Are you always this kind?" he asked. She shrugged. "Only to people who return my handkerchiefs." He smiled, really smiled, and she realized how rare it was for someone like him to laugh without reserve. Their connection wasn't loud or sweeping. It wasn't about grand declarations or stolen kisses. It was the kind of bond that formed in the quiet, through shared silence, understanding glances, and the slow unraveling of walls they'd both built too high, too early. For Lena, it was the first time in years someone had asked what she dreamed of becoming, not just how she planned to survive the week. For Julian, it was the first time someone had looked at him without expecting anything but honesty. One morning, just before she left for her shift, he walked her to the diner door. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but if they had, I might never have stopped to help a man in the rain." He looked at her then, not with admiration, not with gratitude, but with something much deeper, and she saw it. He was healing, and maybe, just maybe, so was she. The article dropped like a bomb. It was a slow morning at the diner when Carla slammed her phone on the counter and said, "Lena, is this your lost tourist?" Lena leaned over, expecting to see something silly, maybe a celebrity look-alike meme, but her breath caught when she saw the headline, "French tech billionaire Julien Duval spotted in New York, low-profile visit raises questions." There was a photo, taken just days earlier. Julien walking through Central Park, scarf loose around his neck, coffee in hand, smiling, relaxed, alive. Lena stepped back. Her heart thudded in her chest. She reread the words, CEO of Duval Technologies, one of Europe's richest men, enigmatic disappearance, rumored to be taking a sabbatical after his mother's death. Everything blurred. She didn't speak for the rest of her shift. That evening, she didn't go to the park where Julien usually waited. She went home. She held Nina longer than usual. She stared at the same wall for hours, the memories twisted in her mind. The way he had spoken, his careful silence about work, his modest clothes, his insistence on knowing her without expectations. But he had lied, omitted, hidden the biggest part of himself, and maybe she had fallen for someone who didn't really exist. The next morning he came to the diner. He didn't dress differently. He didn't bring bodyguards. Just the same coat, the same gentle look in his eyes. She met him outside, arms crossed, heart racing. "So it's true," she said. He nodded. "Yes." "You're a billionaire." "Yes." "How long were you going to keep that from me?" "I didn't plan to tell you at all at first," he admitted, "because I didn't want that version of me to be the one you met." She laughed bitterly. "And what version did you show me? The poor lost man act?" He stepped closer. No, that was real. Everything I said was real. I was lost. Just not in the way you thought. Lena looked away, jaw tight. You lied to me. I hid something, yes, because the moment people know my name, they stop listening. They stop looking. You didn't think I deserved the truth, she snapped. I hoped. You'd know the real me first, the part that doesn't sign deals or sit on boards. Just, Julianne. There was pain in his voice, but Lena couldn't absorb it. All this time, she whispered. I thought you saw me. I did. No, she shook her head. You saw someone kind, helpful, sweet. But I'm also tired, angry, I'm messy. I don't belong in your world. I don't care about that world, but I do, she cried, because I'll never be good enough for it. He reached out, gently. Lena. She pulled her hand back, her eyes welled up, her voice breaking. You have no idea what it's like to grow up believing you'll never matter unless someone chooses you, and now that someone did, it still feels like a joke. I never meant to make you feel that way, he whispered. I know, she said, stepping back, but I feel it anyway. Silence stretched between them, heavy, final. If you need space, Julian said, I'll give it, but not because I've stopped caring. I'm here, I always have been. She didn't respond, just turned away and walked down the street, coat flapping in the wind, tears falling before she could stop them. And for the first time, Julian didn't follow. Because he understood. This wasn't about the lie, it was about the wound it touched. And for Lena, walking away from something that had begun to feel like home was the hardest thing she'd ever done. But she didn't feel worthy of being loved. Not yet. The envelope was small and light, tucked inside the same handkerchief she had once offered him on a rainy night. It was left at the front counter of the diner with no name, no return address. Just her first name written in clean, familiar handwriting. Lena opened it with trembling hands after her shift ended, when the city had gone dark and Nina was already asleep. She unfolded the note, her breath catching as she saw the words written in ink, steady and clear. Lena, you reminded me how to feel. Not as a man with titles, not as someone followed by headlines or watched for his worth, but simply as a human being. I came to New York to disappear. I found you instead. I know I hurt you. That was never my intent, but I see now that some wounds aren't mine to heal. I only hope that one day you'll believe you are worthy. Not because I say so, but because you finally see it for yourself. And when that day comes, I hope you let someone love you, truly. Thank you for everything. Julian. She sat at the kitchen table, the letter pressed to her chest, her eyes blurry with tears, but for once the tears didn't come from despair. They came from something else. Something lighter. Not joy, not yet, but release. Lena didn't write back, not immediately. Instead, she folded the letter neatly and placed it inside her dresser drawer, beneath a stack of old college brochures and faded photographs. Then she got to work. The next day, she picked up an application form from a local community college. A week later, she sat down with an advisor, explained her financial situation, and asked firmly what it would take to finish her teaching certification. She also signed up to volunteer at a small shelter on the East Side, tutoring immigrant children in English and math. It wasn't paid, but for the first time, she felt like she was building something again. Her routine changed. She still worked at the diner, still paid rent late more often than not, but her steps grew more certain. Her laughter came easier. She spent her nights studying, and her weekends helping children pronounce new words, solve fractions, write their first essays. One afternoon, a little boy she tutored handed her a drawing. It was of her, standing in front of a chalkboard, a crown on her head. Ms. Lena is a queen teacher, he had written underneath. She hung it above her bed. The pain didn't vanish. The ache of Julian's absence, the rawness of that final conversation, they still lingered, but they no longer defined her. She stopped looking in the mirror and seeing only the waitress. She saw the fighter, the dreamer, the woman who had fallen and gotten up, over and over, without asking for applause. Some nights, she'd open the drawer, read the letter again, and hold the fabric of the handkerchief between her fingers. She didn't know where Julian had gone, or if he would come back. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for anyone to rescue her. She had learned to stand in the rain alone, and now, she knew, she could love herself through the storm. The late afternoon sun cast long golden lines across the cracked sidewalk outside the community learning center. Children's laughter echoed from inside the building, high, unburdened, full of life. Lena stood by the doorway, helping a student zip up his jacket, when she felt it, that presence. Familiar, steady. She turned. Julian stood at the edge of the curb, holding nothing but a small box in one hand and a quiet expression on his face. No luxury car, no tailored suit, just a simple jacket, jeans, and the soft humility of someone who had left behind everything except the truth. Her breath caught. He didn't rush forward. He waited. When the last student waved goodbye and the door clicked shut behind them, she stepped out to meet him. "You came back," she said, not as a question but a quiet acknowledgement. "I didn't know if I should," Julian replied, "but I knew I had to." She looked at him carefully. He looked different, and yet the same. The way someone looks after walking through fire and choosing not to burn others with it. "I'm not here to change your life," he said. "I know you don't need saving. You never did." Her eyes softened. "I'm here because you changed mine," he continued. And I couldn't forget that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a piece of worn velvet, was a simple wooden ring, beautiful in its imperfection, shaped by hand, smoothed by time. "It's not gold," he said, "not diamonds. Just something I made, from the tree in my mother's backyard. The only thing I kept from the house when I sold it." He looked up. "I don't want a yes from your fear. I want a yes from your peace. From the part of you that knows you're not small, that knows you deserve love. Because you do." Lena stared at the ring, at the man, at the space between them that no longer felt unreachable. "You waited," she whispered. "I would have waited forever." She took a deep breath, eyes blinking back tears. Then she smiled. Not the tired, polite smile she used for customers, not the guarded smile she used with the world, but one that came from somewhere deeper, quieter. She reached out and took his hand, closing it gently around the ring. "You can put it on later," she said. "For now, just walk with me." He nodded, eyes shining. They walked down the sidewalk together, side by side. No fanfare, no headlines, no promises of castles or happily ever afters, just two people, scarred, softened, and finally ready, not because they were perfect, but because they had seen each other at their most human and chosen to stay. The building stood at the corner of 8th and Delancey, a modest brick structure with peeling paint, uneven floorboards, and windows that rattled on windy days. But inside, it pulsed with laughter, warmth, and the low hum of learning. It had once been an abandoned laundromat. Now it was something else entirely. Clare House, named not for fame or legacy but for hope, was the community learning center Lena and Julian had dreamed up together. Not a charity, not a project stamped with pity or pity funding. It was a home. For the children, for the lost, for anyone still learning how to believe they belonged. It had been a year since that day outside the classroom, since the ring carved from wood, since two lonely people stopped walking apart. Lena taught 4 days a week, reading, writing, basic science, and how to speak up with kindness. She still worked shifts at the diner occasionally, not for money but because it grounded her. Julian, once known in boardrooms and business headlines, now wore paint-splattered jeans and spent his mornings fixing leaky faucets, drawing story posters for the walls, or showing a shy 7-year-old how to sharpen a pencil. He never introduced himself as Julian Duval. He simply said, "Hi, I'm Mr. J." One Friday afternoon, after a reading circle where Lena had made funny voices for every character in the book, a small girl named Mia tugged on Julian's sleeve while he was folding paper towels in the corner. "Mr. J?" she asked, blinking up at him with curious eyes. "Are you rich?" He paused, then smiled. "Not in the way you think." She nodded slowly, satisfied, then ran off to join her friends. Later that day, Lena stood in front of the chalkboard, erasing doodles and scribbles left by her students. Behind her, Julian was climbing a stool to replace a flickering light bulb. She turned around and watched him for a moment, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. They hadn't made big announcement. There were no sonograms framed in gold or party confetti. Just one quiet morning when he'd kissed her forehead and whispered, "I can't wait to meet the third member of our team." One of the boys in the front row raised his hand. "Miss Lena, how did you and Mr. J meet?" The other kids looked up, curious. Lena smiled. "It was raining," she said. "He was lost. No phone, no umbrella. Just a crumpled map in the wrong street. I helped him find his hotel." "Why did you help him?" a little voice asked. Lena looked out the window, where the clouds were forming again over the city. "Because no one else would have," she said simply. Julian came down from the stool, brushing his hands on his pants. "And because," he added with a grin, "she thought I looked like a very wet puppy." The kids giggled. Then Lena's voice softened. "True love doesn't come wrapped in diamonds," she said. "Sometimes it walks beside you on a rainy night with nothing but a lost map and a heart waiting to be found." The room grew quiet, a gentle, thoughtful silence. Julian walked over and took her hand. They didn't need to explain more, because in that little building, among mismatched chairs and chipped mugs and the smell of crayons and chalk, their love wasn't about wealth or promises whispered under chandeliers. It was about showing up. It was about seeing someone not for who they should be, but for who they are. And as the children packed their bags and spilled out into the dusk, Lena stood in the doorway, watching them disappear into the arms of mothers, siblings, and foster parents. She leaned against Julian's shoulder and whispered, "Do you think we've done something good?" He kissed her temple. "I think we've started something that matters." And maybe that was the greatest love story of all. One built not on grand gestures, but on everyday kindness. Not on perfection, but on presence. Because sometimes the smallest act of goodness, a warm hand in the rain, a cup of coffee shared in silence, can be the beginning of a love big enough to change two lives and many more. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey, a story born from a rainy night, a quiet act of kindness, and two hearts learning to trust again. Lena and Julian's story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it shows up soaking wet, lost and unexpected, but exactly when we need it most. And sometimes the smallest moments, a shared coffee, a folded handkerchief, a gentle question, can change the course of a lifetime. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where real emotions, real people, and real love come to life. Your next favorite story might be just one click away. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and never underestimate the power of a single, selfless act.